right, I'm here with Andy Molinsky on Office Hours. And Andy is a very well-known professor at Brandeis University in the psychology department. He's written some very popular books, including Global Dexterity, How to Adapt Your Behavior Across Cultures Without Losing Yourself in the Process. And he's also written a book called Reach, a new strategy to help you step outside your comfort zone and rise to the challenge and build confidence. I know he writes a lot for the Harvard Business Review. Andy, first of all, welcome to the program. Thanks for having us, for being on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to start with some questions. I'm reading all about global dexterity. And it's a very popular topic now. It sounds like something I need to get. What is global dexterity and how do we get it?
You get it by reading the book. No, just kidding. Global dexterity, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of writing out there about cultural differences, about how cultures are different, about how Russians are different than Americans, French are different than Germans, and so on and so forth. But what that work doesn't really talk about is the challenges that people face in the real world in adapting and adjusting their behavior in light of those differences, right? And so that's where globalization and global business is really happening in the trenches, I think. You know, you hear a lot of rhetoric about companies going global. I mean, it's at this point, you know, that's kind of the standard, but it is the companies going global. But on the other hand, it's people going global. It's actual individuals negotiating those contracts, trying to build trust, manage those teams. And to be able to do those things across cultures, you need the ability to adapt and adjust your behavior. And that's what global dexterity is.
Give me an example and maybe something that you've seen.
Oh, gosh, so many things. I mean, I guess I'll think of something right here, right now, like today that I experienced. So we both have MBA students that we work with. Imagine you have an MBA student like I did who walked into my office a while back from India, and she was raised in a culture that is a relatively modest, self-effacing culture where she would not sort of speak assertively, confidently, or certainly toot her own horn, especially with authority figures. And so she comes to the United States, she's looking for a job, she realizes she needs to go to a networking event, and she has to kind of toot her own horn and furthermore make small talk with these senior people she doesn't know. She could understand, if she applied the traditional way of understanding culture, she'd look at cultural differences about what they do in India and how India is different than the United States in terms of values and beliefs and behaviors and so on and so forth, which is important. But that's not the challenge she faces. The challenge she faces is not simply intellectually understanding these differences. She has to learn to adapt and adjust her behavior and stay true to who she is. And so that's what global dexterity is.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, isn't it? I'm coming up on 2.5 million miles on one airline alone. So I spend a lot of time in other parts of the planet. And I've been married for decades and decades to a Chinese woman. And one of the things you got to learn very early on is things don't always mean what they mean. You know, so you know, sometimes people will deflect something, and that's part of the culture. And sometimes people will say something just to push you a little bit, and that's part of the culture. And part of it is really learning that. Now, you've got some techniques and some methodologies, some ideas. How do we get better at this? Give us some tricks of the trade.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things that you want to think about when trying to develop global dexterity. You certainly want to understand what I call the cultural code, and especially differences in the cultural code between how you might act in your culture in a specific situation and how someone else might act from that other culture in that situation. And then the key is to try to figure out what your pain points are, what the gaps are between, what you'd be comfortable with and what's required of you, and find a way. I use some different terms to describe this. One term is customizing. Another term is creating a blend or a hybrid or a fusion. Like, for example, you might in the city, wherever you are, whoever is listening, you might have a fusion restaurant. Maybe it's a Chinese Spanish restaurant. Maybe it's a French Italian restaurant. The idea here is, in the world of cooking, you can create these fusions, and you can do the same thing with your behavior. You can find a way to kind of have your cake, to carry the food metaphor, have your cake and eat it too, to sort of adapt and adjust, but at the same time not lose who you are. So in the case of the Indian MBA student, for example, going back to that case, I have students who have figured out their own customizations, their own fusions. One might be, for example, learning to talk about themselves and their accomplishments, but at the same time giving a nod to the team as well.
What should we look for in that conversation to know whether we're on target and we're understanding them, or whether we've kind of missed a little bit here? I mean, in the real conversations that we're having, how do we know if we're kind of in sync here or out of sync? What are some cues?
You mean? Say more about what you mean by in terms of being
for example, I'm married into a Chinese family, and it's very inappropriate to give somebody a direct compliment. They try and deflect compliments. It's part of the culture. But when I first got married, and you first start meeting people, and they start deflecting things, there's a part where you're saying, how come this isn't landing? Am I missing something here? Right? So you'd kind of know I whiffed on this one. What are some things you've experienced, or some ideas of knowing whether we're really connecting with this whole idea of dexterity?
Well, I would call those sort of like faux pas or cultural mistakes. And the problem sometimes is that the indicators to know whether you've made a mistake might themselves be culturally specific. Like, so in that case, if you started to, like, let's say someone said to you, geez, Jeff, your Chinese is really great. And your American style would probably be something like, oh, geez, thanks so much. I've been really working hard at it. I really appreciate that, right? That would be your American response. But in China, that doesn't cut it. You need to be the more Chinese, I think. I'm no China expert, but I think the Chinese style would be more like, oh, no. I have still so much to learn. It's very...
Yeah, my Chinese is very bad, and I hear that all the time.
No, it's very bad. It's, it's like, so
now, I want to switch gears a little bit here. Yeah. One of the ideas that I love that you're right about is your friendship portfolio, and I really notice this in people. And because it's a big issue in innovation. Innovation is produced through constructive conflict, right? Creative and constructive, meaning you respect the person, but you challenge ideas. And so diversity is a very big issue in my world, right? That you have to have these diverse groups, because that's where you get that generative energy and those points of departure. But you talk about it even more specifically on a more intimate or personal level about your friendship portfolio. Talk a little bit about what that is and how we can make sure that we've got a diversified friendship portfolio.
Yeah, when we at work, do you have friends? Do you have colleagues or acquaintances, right? And you might have a variety or set of any one of those. You might be just like with stocks and bonds. Do you want to have all your portfolio in sort of like small caps, or the analogy would be, do you want to just live your life at work having a whole bunch of acquaintances? Or do you want to kind of try to diversify your portfolio to have some acquaintances, some colleagues, and then maybe even some closer friends? And that portfolio might change over time. It might depend on the point in your career. It might, a variety of things. But it's sort of I always found it an interesting way to think about the set of relationships with people that you have in your life at work, where you are now, where you've been, and where you might be. So it's just a little way of trying to think about that.
Yeah, it seems to me one of the things that's always interesting to me is how social media gives the illusion that we've got all these diverse points of view, but in fact, everybody believes all the same nonsense you believe, and if they don't, you unfriend them. So more and more, we're getting micro segments of people who, hang out with people and they think they're being diverse, but they're not really being diverse. Is there an audit or something that we could do on a personal level to say, I might have a lot of blind spots here because I'm hanging out with a lot of people who believe all the same rubbish that I believe?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you'd probably need to find, I do know some people who do that on Facebook, for instance. They call it sort of the echo chamber, right? All they see is information and news that's consistent with their point of view. And, I know some people, I have some friends who, especially around the recent election, who have wanted to try to kind of diversify their portfolio to hear other perspectives, but then like they're so disillusioned with those perspectives that they unfriend the friend,
Yeah.
whatever it is. So, I think that I think that there's a bit of a superficiality to these social media connections, if they're exclusively social media connections, anyways. Because what you're not having a human sort of debate or discussion. You're not able to go in depth. It's a bit of an impoverished means of communication, right?
Yeah.
I think that that's, if you're relying on that for your diverse points of views, you're probably not achieving the kind of growth that you're aiming for. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so getting beyond, and there's so much evidence now, particularly about young people and the challenges they're having because so much of their relationships are social media, the challenges they're having with actual interactions with people.
Right.
And being able to deal with conflict and differences and all that kind of stuff, which is a real challenge, because so much of American culture is based on that we're from different places and that we have to come up with new ways of doing things, right? That's part of our strength. Now, assume for a minute you're talking to a new manager. I'm brand new. I've been working in America for 10 years. I've worked my way up in the world. But now I've been relocated to someplace, the Philippines, or I've been, Peru, someplace. Give me 2 or 3 strategies that I can put into place so that I can actually be more dexterous. I can actually have more facility in being a more effective leader in those particular areas, because I'm brand new and I really don't know yet what I don't know.
Yeah, find a mentor, find a cultural mentor, someone ideally who who has a foot in both worlds, who can sort of empathize and understand the experience of adapting, who has sort of I'm imagining this person's from the United States originally, the expat, so understanding the U.S. perspective, but also understanding the Filipino perspective, and then understanding some common sort of kind of gaps or missteps or tripwires between the two cultures. You don't want to necessarily assume that you're going to experience those very same tripwires, but that, I think, gives you a really good initial way of understanding potential cultural differences. I think that's that's a first stage, as you're starting to understand the code, the difference between the codes, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
But then over time, I think it becomes more nuanced. Maybe you're starting to cultivate your style. Maybe your style ultimately becomes a bit of a blend between the Filipino and American style. Who knows? But that's a little bit down the road, I think. I think when you're starting to kind of get used to the culture, that's what you want to do. The other piece that I would say is try to leverage natural interests that you have. Like, let's say you're into photography, or let's say you love soccer, or let's say you love whatever it is. Use that as a leverage point to actually try to establish relationships in that culture, because I find that there's a tremendous power in relationships in a new culture.
Yeah.
Because it serves, it enables you to kind of explore in a curious way cultural differences, faux pas and mistakes. Sometimes you can even laugh about them in the context of a relationship and so on. But I think that's really key. And sometimes it is hard for people to build relationships in completely new cultures, and that's why I think starting with something like a hobby or something that you like, that you just genuinely like, that's a great sort of entry point.
One of the things I would add to that, I think I learn a lot about cultures by eating with people.
Yeah.
What do
absolutely.
they eat?
Yeah.
What are the ceremonies? Are we supposed to have coffee at the end? That's sort of a friendship thing if you're in parts of the Middle East. If you're in parts of East Asia, when you're offered the cheek of the fish, that's a very auspicious thing. And you learn a lot about kind of their not only their rituals, but what they kind of hold as dear and important to them. Now, Andy, you do a lot of writing and you have a lot of resources. How do we learn more about your work, and how do we learn more about becoming more culturally dexterous?
Well, I have a website, which I think is a great place, and I kind of constructed the website to be the kind of place I would want to visit. So that was my aim. It's www.andymolinsky.com, ANDYMOLINSKY.com.
Mm-hmm.
I have lots of articles. I write for Harvard Business Review and Inc.com and Fast Company and Psychology Today. Lots of places, lots of quizzes and tools and tips and videos and all sorts of stuff. In addition to links to my socials, so on LinkedIn and in Twitter and Facebook, I'm pretty active on those as well. So and I have my email address there. So I'd encourage you to check it out and check out my books, Global Dexterity, and my new book, Reach.
Wonderful. I follow you on HBR. Some great stuff. Andy, I want to thank you for taking time with me today on Office Hours, and I want to encourage everybody to go out and to look into your work and to buy your book. And again, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. This was fun. Thanks for having me on.